Go away. Go away. Is it bothering you?
No. No, it doesn't bother me.
I'll soon rid you of the pest.
It's all right, Nurse Anderson. Please leave it alone. But, Nurse! Stop it, Nurse. Stop it. Leave it alone. Leave it alone. No! No! I want to look at the fly.
Get back into
Please
bed.
let me look at the fly.
Back into bed, madame.
Yeah, bring it to you. Where is it?
Oh, my God.
Yes? Yes, who is this?
Hi.
You're the first to see a miracle.
You'll have to be more specific.
Something that'll change the world and human life as we know it.
Teleportation?
Doesn't sound possible, does it?
It'll change the world as we know it, right?
You succeeded completely. It's unbelievable.
I think it's time for champagne. Is this a romance we're having? Is that what it is? Just keep me informed.
Andre wants to show you something.
In the lab?
Mm-hmm.
What is it, flat screen?
It's better.
What are we waiting for? Let's do it.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
Let me see your face. I won't be afraid.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
A fly which I did not notice was in the disintegrator with me.
Don't go back to it.
That's your advice?
We've got to find it.
What is this all about?
Wants to turn me into something else.
No, the story is impossible.
No, up here.
Do flies live a long time?
There's one in the hall.
You're in love with her, aren't you?
Something terrible has happened.
I'm pregnant.
Show me the fly.
Brundle fly.
It's like a nightmare.
I'm Vincent Price. What unearthly horror did that girl gaze upon? It would be unfair at this time to show you any more. You must see it with your own eyes to believe it. When the fly comes your way.
The Fly is a short story written by George Langlin that was first published in Playboy magazine in 1957. The story opens with a late-night call from Helene, informing her brother-in-law Henry she has just killed her husband Andre. Told in flashback, we learn Andre was a brilliant scientist who was working on disintegrating matter and then reintegrating it. And what do you know, he accomplishes it. Unfortunately, a tiny fly flies into the disintegrator with him that causes a major problem when they both appear on the other end. Andre and the fly's atoms get all mixed up, resulting in one heck of a mess. For those who are only familiar with the film versions of the story, you should really read the short story. It's really good, and it has a few shocking surprises in it that were never included in the film adaptations. The following year, director Kurt Newman filmed the story, and 20th Century Fox released The Fly onto movie screens. A CinemaScope production in glorious color. The script changes a number of things from the short story, notably the ending, but overall it's a pretty faithful adaptation of it. It's a love story with Andre, played by David Hedison. He's billed as Al in the movie, I'm not sure why. Probably the studio or his agents didn't like the name David or something stupid like that. Anyway, Andre is fixated on his work. He makes that rash decision, and his wife Helene, played by Patricia Owens, has to watch him disintegrate. Andre is in quite the pickle, and he needs Helene to find that pesky fly. Then he can attempt to go through the disintegrator with it again and hope their atoms get all sorted out. And time is running out. Andre's brain is turning into insect mush. If she can't catch that fly, then Andre will just have to kill himself. What's interesting about the movie is how Helene gets most of the screen time and takes center stage. She begins to fall apart mentally alongside Andre, who stays locked in his lab with his head covered. She's breaking down. She's in shock. She literally has to act crazy in order to protect him and his work. What a cool dame. She goes through as much of a metamorphosis as Andre does. She's wearing these lovely bright dresses, looking the perfect 1950s housewife in the beginning, with the perfect hair and the makeup. Then she's running around like a loon trying to catch this fly. She's the one everyone around is looking at like she's crazy. Vincent Price, her maid, the detective. Her behavior is erratic, and her actions make no sense to anyone. Why is she so paranoid about killing this white-headed fly? No one really knows what's going on with Andre. He's just locked in his lab sucking down milk and brandy, leaving Helene the burden of catching that blasted fly. They're trying to put her away in the nut house. It's kind of funny. She's still perfectly presentable too when they're coming to lock her up. Like, look at that outfit. So perfectly dressed. And Patricia Owens does a good job at this. Actually, the whole cast does a really great job. They all take the story very seriously and try to make it as believable as possible. Andre's actual transformation isn't really focused on. He goes through this disintegrator off camera, and for the rest of the time he's this silent, blanket-covered figure. The only thing we see him suffer through is sort of a mental breakdown, which is shown via his crazed writing spurts and struggling with his fly arm. But mainly we're watching Helene go on this emotional roller coaster as Andre sits already defeated.
Promise me that you won't do anything.
The detective is a very stereotypical kind of rational thinking character. But I like how in the end he's proved completely wrong. He knows it, and he ends up being just as guilty of what Helene was accused of. Vincent Price in this is kind of odd since he's such a straight character. Audiences today probably would think Price would be playing a more devious part in this. But really, he's just a nice guy here. Oh, he does lie to Helene at one point to get her to tell him the truth. And actually, that lie really screws Helene.
You never had it.
So maybe he's not all that nice. There is an unsettling horror and menace to this version. The silent cloaked head, him knocking yes or no to her questions. At the time, the studio really tried to keep what the fly looked like a secret. They didn't want anyone to know what they were going to see until they paid for their ticket and the big scene comes up. So the audience back then had to be on the edge of their seat with anticipation of seeing this. And the reveal, I still think works. Yeah, the big fly head might look old B-movie-ish by today's standards, but I still think it's some great makeup, along with the added moving of his antennas and stuff. Then that's followed by the classic mosaic shot of her screaming. Real fun stuff. And of course, the other memorable moment in this is the ending, and what becomes of that little fly. It's still a very effective, creepy scene. Movies are a product of their time, so watching it today, some things might look stiff and antiquated now. Owens screaming and crying comes off a bit melodramatic at times. I attribute that more to the acting style back then. Actually, I think it's more disturbing when we watch her killing her husband and she does it in that shocked, blank state. She's just emotionless and finally accepts what needs to be done and what she has to do. It's sort of the opposite take on when Geena Davis is forced to do the same thing 28 years later. You know, it might look like a silly old monster movie, but I still think it holds up pretty well. The actual film looks much more polished than other monster type of movies during this period. I guess that has to do with the help from Fox, who sunk more money into this than had it been some smaller independent production. It was probably Fox who decided to try to give it a more positive ending too. That part comes off a little too convenient, and it's not as morose a conclusion as the short story had. Newman really makes it all work, and made a really good film. It's on the better side of the scale of 1950s sci-fi horror movies. Inevitably, because of The Fly being such a big hit, sequels would be born. None which I think much of. But the original, it's considered a classic, and I can see why. It can be a bit stodgy and dated, but it holds up very well for what it is. A fun sci-fi suspense thriller. "28 years later, director David Cronenberg retells the tale of a scientist, a teleportation machine, and a pesky fly. This time out, Jeff Goldblum is the scientist on the verge of a revolutionary breakthrough. Goldblum's real-life main squeeze at the time, Geena Davis, is a science reporter who stumbles onto the story, and of course falls for his Seth Brundle. In between objects teleporting and sex happening in Brundle's science loft, Davis's publisher and former lover John Getz is getting jealous and wants to cause as much aggravation to the couple as he can. Being a little drunk and angry, Brundle decides to take a ride in his very cool teleporter. And of course, that fly hitches a ride inside. Then things really start to go downhill for this love story. The original film left room for improvement with this story, which the remake really capitalizes on. In this version, it's not structured as a flashback. We immediately meet these two characters as they first meet each other, and are taken on a linear journey getting to know each of them as they do. And then we watch as Brundle and the story begins to change and turns into a horrific tale with a tragic ending. Goldblum has always had a knack for giving these very relaxed kind of performances. He can deliver lines that make every word sound so off the cuff you'd believe he was just improvising his way through a movie. And here I think he gives the performance of his career. He runs through the gamut of emotions, along with the physical and mental changes he goes through. He's done some great stuff since, but for me, he has never been able to top his work here. Davis is equally good, and does her best as the woman trying to keep it together as her love literally starts falling apart in all manner of ways. John Getz usually gets overlooked, but I think he's great here. At first he appears to be the usual pain-in-the-ass ex-boyfriend, but he gets to do a bit of transforming too when Veronica really needs help, and he comes in to lend support. I always get the impression the wounded, arrogant pride we see him initially treat her with covers up the fact that he truly does care for her. One interesting thing the film does is telling this story in a very claustrophobic, compact way. It mainly consists of our three leads, and that's it. There's no police being called or nosy scientists sniffing about to find out Brundle's secrets. There's not even a cranky neighbor banging on Brundle's door telling him to keep the noise down. The film also doesn't rush through the transformation. It's not an immediate thing, but a gradual progression with all this weird crap happening to Brundle. It also makes the smart decision to allow Goldblum to articulate himself the whole time. He's able to communicate with Davis, unlike Hedison, who is mute and typing out messages. There's nothing more to be said about the makeup in this movie other than it's fantastic. It's disgusting, convincing, disturbing. You know, it was 28 years between the original and this remake. Obviously in that time, advances in special effects and makeup happened. Whereas the original relied on a big fly mask and a fly arm, the remake takes Brundle's gradual transformation to a whole new level. Within that 28-year time span, the original's makeup aged quite a bit. It's cool and all, but, we see it's a big mask. Now it's 2014. Again, 28 years has passed since the remake now. And the effects and makeup hold up remarkably well. I mean, this stuff looks better than a lot of the crap we see in movies being made today. It's brilliant stuff. And Cronenberg makes sure it's not just gore filling the screen, but always making us conscious of that nice scared guy of Brundle this is happening to. We never forget about the humanity that's being slowly eradicated from him. That's what makes the ending so sad. It's not just Veronica killing this monster, she's killing Brundle, and we don't forget that. It's heartbreaking. There's been a lot of speculation that Cronenberg's fly metamorphosis is meant to represent AIDS or cancer or some illness. Whether it was intentional or not, you can see that if you look at it that way. But I always viewed it as the classic story of a scientist making a real bad judgment call, told in one of the most realistic, convincing ways I'd ever seen. Like seeing Brundle's collection of lost body parts in his medicine cabinet. That is friggin' crazy. It's funny when I talk with people who saw this when it first came out all those years ago, and the impact it hit them with. This was causing kids nightmares. I remember managing to get into the theater to check this out, and it was intense. I think I bought tickets for one crazy summer and snuck into this. At the time it was a scary, really creepy movie, but now I can appreciate more of what Cronenberg did with this story. This was more than just a monster movie. Actually, thinking back, I think this was the first time I saw a gynecologist in a movie. What a scene that is. Of course, they tried a sequel to this again, and I wasn't a fan of that one. I don't really think this story lends too well to be sequelized. It's a great standalone story, but I think that's it. You would think, at certain points, scientists would figure out, hey, let's make sure that the thing is free of flies before we run this. But you know how it is. If something's successful, then Hollywood always wants to repeat its success, so they keep trying. I would say The Fly would probably work better as that stage play they were talking about doing, rather than trying to create a whole film franchise with it. Whenever the topic of remakes comes up, and there's that unavoidable argument of how lazy and uninspired and pointless they are, someone will always point out an exception to that general view, and cite as examples remakes that have surpassed their original counterparts. And one of the most often remakes listed on that side of the argument will be Cronenberg's The Fly. And it's not surprising why. It deserves it. This isn't to take anything away from the original '58 film. I still really enjoy it, and would still recommend people to check it out, but the '86 version, it's in a different league.
Have you ever heard of insect politics?